And the more I research this, the more I feel that is symbolic of this battle between this Martian white race and this Anunnaki reptilian race, because the dragon was very much used to symbolize this serpent race in the ancient world. And so St. George is not actually a British deity, it's actually Phoenician, because that's where the Phoenicians went, to Britain. St. Michael, which is a great Christian deity, was an ancient Phoenician deity also, and areas of Europe, like called St. Michael's Mount, one in England, southern England, came from the Phoenicians who settled that area. Now, the Templars then moved out of France around into Scotland, and that was one area they went. They went across to the Americas, and they also went down to Portugal. Now, before I get into that, let me show you one thing in Scotland which confirms so much of the fact the Templars were there, and indeed there are many artifacts to prove it, and other evidence. And that's this place, Rosslyn Chapel, in just south of Edinburgh it is, the great city on the east coast of Scotland. And this was built on the land of the St. Clair family. Now, the St. Clair family were a French bloodline going back to the Near East that went to Scotland and became the Sinclair family, that classic Scottish name Sinclair. And this is one of the great holy grails of the Brotherhood today, the Rosslyn Chapel. Now, in the stonework of Rosslyn Chapel, you see sweet corn plants, aloe plants, and cactus plants, etc., that at the time this was built were only found in America. Perhaps still are, I don't know, but certainly then. Which is remarkable because this was built before Columbus left on his journey to discover America. In other words, they'd been long before, they just didn't want us to know it. So, as they went to Scotland, so another group of Templars came down to Portugal, which will connect into America now as we start to enter the modern world. They hid behind an organization called the Knights of Christ. The Knights Templar are under another name. And they were a maritime organization because the Templars had a massive fleet of ships. And actually they flew on their ships the flag of the Skull and Bones, which has become known as the pirates' flag. It was the Templar flag, which is why the Skull and Bones is still a symbol today of this brotherhood. And one of the Grand Masters of this Knights of Christ, the Templars under another name, was a guy called Prince Henry the Navigator. And he had access to maps of the world that the general population never had because of this pyramid, knowledge, ignorance. This is significant because the father-in-law of Christopher Columbus was a sea captain close to Prince Henry the Navigator. So Columbus was not looking for India when he found the Americas. He knew basically where he was going because the maps already existed. Because this unfolding agenda has a time scale, not least through the sun cycles, etc., it means that although they knew the Americas existed, the point had come in the agenda where it had to be officially discovered and therefore occupied by the European races. Now, Christopher Columbus, his name wasn't actually Columbus, his name was Colon. Why did they call him Columbus? Because in the various, not just religious, but other historical texts, you see the codes and the code names that the initiates would understand that the general population do not. I mentioned a few minutes ago that the symbol for Nimrod was the fish and the symbol for Queen Semiramis was the dove. Columbus means dove. In French today, colombe actually still means dove. And the Romans in the Roman Empire worshipped a deity called Venus Columba, Venus the dove. Both Venus and the dove were symbols of Queen Semiramis, this deity. So that's where he got his name, Columbus. But there's more actually to look at in terms of this. Because 4 or 5 years after Columbus found that part of the Americas, down the Caribbean, etc., another guy left Bristol, England. And Bristol comes from Barati, that's where the name evolved from, the Phoenician deity. His name was John Cabot, and he discovered what we now call North America. Conventional history has not put Columbus and Cabot together, but you can do, not least through the research of a Freemasonic historian of great reputation called Manly P. Hall, who points out that Columbus and Cabot both operated in Genoa at the same time, and both were connected to the same secret society network. And within a few years, 4 or 5 years of each other, one finds one part of the Americas, the other finds another part of the Americas. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. What was actually happening was the time scale had come to take over America, and it moved on after that. So Columbus was a front man and a knowing one. There's one other group that came out of this Near East, which it is vital to talk about. And it relates actually to Columbus too. We've seen how one group of peoples moved by land across from that Caucasus, Turkey, Iran area, and across to become the white races of Europe. We've seen how the Phoenicians went to Britain much earlier than that, 3000 BC. But there was another group which came out of the Middle Near East and parked themselves in Venice in northern Italy. And these Phoenicians became the Venetians. And they created a maritime, because they were a maritime nation, the Phoenicians, and financial empire out of Venice. And that financial empire was based on lending people money that didn't exist and charging interest on it and funding both sides in wars. Now, within these white Phoenician bloodlines, yet again, were these reptilian bloodlines, these Anunnaki bloodlines. And again, you'll have to refer to The Biggest Secret to see the enormous evidence that this stuff about the Anunnaki and the reptilians is correct. While they were in Venice, this group of Phoenicians Anunnaki became known as the Black Nobility because they started creating titles for themselves and taking over titles that already existed. And they got this nickname, the Black Nobility. Now, some of the so-called Jewish banking names of the world today, like the Warburgs, not actually Jewish at all, because they came out of this group in Venice. The Warburgs, who were fundamental in creating the Federal Reserve, the so-called Central Bank of America, which is privately owned from people in Europe, the Warburgs were called the Abraham del Banco family in Venice, and they became the Warburgs when they moved up into Germany and Europe. So eventually, this black nobility in Venice moved north through Germany and centered themselves in Amsterdam. In 1688, one of this black nobility called William of Orange was manipulated onto the throne of England as William III. With that, this whole shebang moved across and created its epicenter in London. So at that point, those bloodlines that had gone much earlier through the Phoenicians into Britain and those that had come cross land and also through Venice actually came together in London. It was William of Orange, a few years after he became king, who signed the charter that created the Bank of England, and the central banking system was created. It was after that time that the City of London financial district became the center of global finance. And it was after that time that we got the great British Empire, when these bloodlines were expanded from Britain all over the world, to Africa, to Australia, to Asia, to the Americas. And what started out in Babylon and the Near East and moved outwards now went global because of the British Empire. People say that because the British Empire and these European empires have actually contracted since then, that it can't be true that the world's still controlled from London and these cities. But there's two ways of controlling people. One has a finite life, one can go on forever until someone exposes it. The first one is overt, in-your-face control, the dictatorship, where Britain controls this country and controls that country. The people in that country know where they are. They're controlled by an outside force, like the Russians during communism and the Germans during Hitler.